Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Hey now, today we're going to take a look at the Apex Theropod deck building game from Die Hard Games. And I should mention right off the top that I have the Exotic Predators limited edition. This was sent to me by the publisher, by the way, in full disclosure. I know that it's got a couple of exclusive creatures, and I think the card backs are different, which seems like an odd choice. But I'm not sure exactly how much stuff is different, and I'm not sure if this is going to be available at retail in general, so just keep that in mind. But in any event, as you can tell from the name of the game and the box, this is a dinosaur game, which immediately got me excited. This is in fact, a dinosaur deck building game, which should be right in my wheelhouse. You take control of an apex predator, so there's all carnivores that you're taking control of in this game. You can't be a brontosaurus, I'm sorry. And you're trying to be the best at what you do, which is hunting, killing creatures, and evolving to be the supreme, the apex, if you will, predator of your time. Let's go ahead and take a brief look at how the game is played. Then we're going to come back and I'll let you know what I think. Okay, I'm going to give you a brief run through of Apex Theropod deck building game, and I'm going to be completely honest here. I want to make this as quick as possible because there are a lot of things going on in this game. Even though the core gameplay is relatively simple, as you can tell, there's a lot of decks, a lot of different things to keep track of. Now, the goal of the game, there's an environment deck that you're going to be running through every round. And when you get through the entire environment deck, then you are going to count up the number of boss cards you have defeated in your deck. And if you've defeated more boss cards than the other players, you're going to win. If there's a tie for that, or if no one has killed any of the boss cards, then you're going to add up the victory points on all the different prey and predator cards, prey and big game and titan cards that you've gained from the hunting grounds. Now, first and foremost, this is a deck building game. If you're not familiar with deck building games, you start off, all the players start off with a weak deck of cards that they're going to strengthen over time by using those starter cards to purchase better cards, put them into the deck, reshuffle, and gain them. However, Apex does quite a few things differently than other deck building games. The point of the game is that you're all these perfect predators back in the prehistoric world, so each player is going to take an Apex deck at the start of the game. I believe there are 9 different Apex predators you can play as, and just to give you a taste of what some of them are, some of them are sort of your standard fare that you would expect. This is a Gigantosaurus. This is actually one of the hatchling cards for the Gigantosaurus. You have the raptors, and there's a couple of different types of raptors as well. Some of them are a little more off the wall, like you have the Quetzalcoatlus. I'm going to butcher these names, by the way. I'm just telling you right now. Here's one of the Gigantosaurus older cards. And then you have like the giant alligator, the Sarcrus, or what is it called? The Sarcosuchus. So there's a wide variety of different dinosaurs to choose from. In the instruction book, it also tells you that some of them are easier to play as than others. Some of them have higher difficulty ratings. Most of those Apex cards are going to be shuffled and set aside as your Apex deck. Then the rest of the cards are going to be your starter cards. There's going to be 12 cards that constitute your starter cards, and you're going to shuffle them up, draw 6, and at the end of every turn you're going to always draw up to 6 cards, reshuffling whenever you have to. Now, the basic cards that you're going to start off with, the deck that I have in front of me is a Tyrannosaurus deck, of course. First off, you have hatchlings. The hatchlings are just a very weak members of your species. Down in the bottom corner, whenever anything is down in the bottom left corner, that's what you're gaining from playing the card. In this case, this type of currency in the game is hunting power. So this is what you're going to use to go into the hunting grounds to try to take out other dinosaurs. You also have one juvenile, and yes, I'm sorry to break this to you if you weren't aware, but common scientific consensus now is that Tyrannosauruses and a lot of other large dinosaurs actually had feathers. So there's that. Juveniles, as you can see, are a little bit more powerful than the hatchlings. You also have egg cards, which, by the way, are another type of cards you can get from the Evolved deck, which I'll get back to in a minute. Egg cards are interesting because when you play one, you get to draw another card from your deck, but you also hatch a card. Now, what do I mean by hatching a card? I mentioned that you have your Apex deck over here, which are the rest of the stronger cards of your species. When you hatch a card, you're going to flip the top card of your Apex deck over and form the hatchery. You are able to, for the rest of the rounds, or during the part of the round where you can purchase evolve cards, you can also instead choose to purchase a card that is in your hatchery, which in this case is a very strong member of the Tyrannosaurus species. The amount of evolve points, the other type of currency you have in the game that you have to use to purchase it, is up in the top corner, and here you have how much hunting it gives you and what its special ability is. This one is you get +2 hunt if it was played with a hatchling, because I guess that's like a mother Tyrannosaurus, which is adorable, actually. And finally, the other types of cards that round out your deck are the prey carcasses and a titan carcass. These are just the carcasses that your tribe is feeding. That's a weird way to describe dinosaurs, but your tribe is feeding off of in order to get stronger, and hence the type of currency they give you are those evolve points I mentioned before. And when you play these, you simply play these or your hunting cards and get the points for them, and then you're able to use those during the phases when you would either go hunting or you would go trying to get evolve cards or your hatchery cards. Now let's go ahead and talk about these other rows of cards here. Like in any deck building game, you're going to have different arrangements of cards that you can purchase and draft cards from to put them into your deck. The first one is the hunting trail. Every single spot in one of these two rows, by the way, is called a footprint. But the hunting trail is where you're going to be fighting just common prey for your dinosaurs. You're all carnivores, by the way, just to clear that up. Or there could be big game, which are like larger, fiercer dinosaurs that are a little bit tougher to take out and might actually injure you. Or titans, which are like enormous brachiosauruses and such. Or even if you're playing in the standard game modes, you have predators and menaces. And of course, there are boss cards. There are going to be boss cards that are going to be mixed into that deck. So let me just show you a few of those to give you an idea of what they're like. So here you have I'm going to butcher all of these names, I know it. The Struthiomimus. Now up in the top corner here is how much hunting power you need to expend in order to successfully hunt this card. And it's really, really hard to see, but this tiny number here, which in this case is just a 1, is victory points. It's really annoying. Now, down in the bottom, there will be special effects. Like this one says, alert, this card is recycled. I'll get to what alert means in a moment. But over here, you'll have evolve points. In fact, all of these cards that you can get from the hunting grounds have evolve points. When you take one of these cards into your deck, well, you don't take them into your deck, actually, is what I should clarify. Instead, you're going to have a separate pile. Yes, there's a lot of different piles and decks in this game called your Hoard, where your hunted cards are going to go. When you want to, when you need the evolve points, you can choose to consume these creatures that you have hunted previously and gain those evolve points right away, but only one time. You hold on to the card because you need to keep track of the victory points that you have. So let me go ahead and show you the rest of, or just some more examples of what you'll find there. Here's prey, the Tyrannosaurus, and here's big game, the Parasolobababus. Oh man. Terrible. My English degree is really showing off here. The Ankylosaurus, which is another big game card. Let me show you some of its, this one has some abilities here. It has, when you hunt it, you gain an affliction card. Affliction cards are nasty cards that you may be forced to take by certain cards. I'll just go ahead and show you some of those now, like a flesh wound card. And these are basically just taking up space in your deck and setting you back. But then you have worse ones like severe trauma, which can force you to take more affliction cards, or even the virus, which is the nastiest one. You have to take more affliction cards and then cycle it back through your deck very quickly. So those can be really, really bad. So there's just those, just going through some more of these. There's one of the Titan cards, which as you can see are really, really difficult to try and hunt, but they do give you a lot of evolve points if you manage to take them. You have menaces and predators, which are even deadlier and almost as hard to take down as some of the Titans. So you can get some good rewards, but they might also hurt you very badly as well. The other row of cards you have are the Evolve cards, and these are cards that give you special abilities and that you will actually put into your deck and draw on subsequent turns. The Evolve points you need to buy them are up in the top corner, and then they don't ever provide you any kind of currency. They just give you different special abilities. So and there's actually not a wide variety of these, so I'll show you most of the main ones here. You have Metabolic Growth, which you may gain one of the hatchlings from the elimination pile, which is like the out of the game pile, and add it to your hand. All hatchlings played this turn have +1 hunt value. You have Metabolic Transformation, which works well with that other card. You may eliminate any one card from your hand to draw another card. Dynamic Vitality lets you dump Affliction cards out of your deck in order to draw more cards. And Acute Alertness, you may reveal this card from your hand to avoid actions played from alert cards, ambush actions from the game that affect the game trail, and certain environment cards, the Blinding Agent and Ceratopsian Onslaught. Alright, in the last few cards, remember there's a lot of different decks and things to keep track of in this game. This deck up here is just the Affliction deck, which I've already talked about. Defensive Stance and Disaster Area, these are just special, and Alert by the way, are just special cards that you're going to keep off to the side because at times some of the prey that is in the hunting trail is going to take a defensive stance and gain special abilities based on what their defensive stance abilities are. Some cards in the environment deck will make disaster areas, which actually block off parts of the hunting trail and permanently give you one less spot to hunt from. And then alert cards, I'm going to get back to. That's a little more complicated. The environment deck. Now, one of the cards in the environment deck is actually going to gauge the difficulty of the game, and that is the emergence card, which is kind of like a breather card. It says that all players hatch one card and draw one card, and you can't take any ambush actions and so on. You will stack these on top of the deck at the beginning of the game depending on how difficult you want the game to be. If you want more of a breather before some of the nasty environment cards come out and slam the players, you'll stack more of these on top of the deck. Now, some of the normal environment cards that there's quite a few of them, but and you're not going to play with all of them. I believe you only play with seven of them in addition to the other cards you're forced to play with. Here's Tropical Storm, which players may gain an alert card in order to draw 2 additional cards. Alert cards are not a good thing to have. And Severe Drought. All cards in the game show are eliminated. Players eliminate 1 Apex card in their hand. Carcass cards have +2 evolve value this round. So these are the kind of effects that may happen at the start of each round when you're drawing cards from that deck. But at the bottom of the deck, you are always going to, if I could find them, you are always going to stack 2 cards in this order. The Asteroid Impact, and then the last card, the Extinction, which is quite sad because these are cool dinosaurs and you're watching their final end, supposedly. So all cards in the game trail are eliminated. Footprint 2 is replaced with a Disaster Area card, which I talked about before. All players eliminate their entire hand except 1 card and draw 4 cards. And Extinction is even worse. All cards except boss cards in the game trail and the hunt deck are eliminated. They're gone from the game because this is the final round. The deck is then shuffled. All players eliminate their Apex deck and discard their entire hand. All players draw 4 cards. You are winding down on this period of history. All right, we're almost there, so let me just explain how the typical game round is going to work. And by the way, I am explaining the standard mode. There is an emergence mode, which is just a bit easier. It's meant to be an introductory mode, but I figured I'll just throw you right into the standard mode. So you'll decide who's going to go first at the start of the game on your turn. If this is not the first turn of the game and there have been cards that were removed and purchased or for whatever reason removed from the hunting trail or the evolve trail, that's the first thing you do is repopulate those with cards, filling up from left to right. Now, the next thing you would do, if you have an alert card in your hand, you must play it then and there. Now, I'll tell you what alert cards do, although it's not going to make a lot of sense quite yet until we get to the next step. When you play an alert card, it says you have to discard all cards in the ambush point, and the alert action is activated on cards in the game trail. Now, some cards will say alert, and if an alert happens, they run away. They get recycled to the bottom of the deck, or they're put into the eliminated pile. They basically run away from you because they've been alerted. Now, how would you actually gain one of those, and what the heck is an ambush point? Well, that's the next thing you can do on your turn. If you have not played any cards yet on your turn, and that would include alert cards, so if you were forced to play an alert card, you can't do this. But if you haven't done that, you can set up an ambush point. Setting up an ambush point is taking 3 Apex cards, or hunting cards, I should say, cards that give you hunt value from your hand, and setting them aside to the side of your deck. So that's yet another pile you have to worry about. Pretend those are actually hunting cards. And you're essentially setting those up so that on your next turn, you can just immediately use those in addition to the new 6 cards that you draw. So essentially you're saying, okay, I'm not going to have a great turn now, but I'm going to set myself up to maybe have a much better turn next time. That's setting up an ambush point. The downside to that is that you must take an alert card and immediately put it into your discard pile when you set up an ambush point, because the likelihood of you alerting the prey to your presence is getting higher and higher as you start fanning out with the different members of your species. The next thing you would do is a boss battle. If there is a boss now you're going to make the hunting deck out of a ton of different cards that I've already shown you, but if there's a boss that happens to randomly come out, then you have to deal with that boss. That's like the only thing you can do on this turn. And if you choose to not fight the boss, you have to immediately go to the end step of your turn. Just to show you a few of what these bosses might look like. Well, here's actually a T-Rex. So you can play as a T-Rex, but that might actually be the boss as well. Here's a Titanoboa, so basically Anaconda, if you've seen that terrible movie. And every boss also has minions as well that will be shuffled into the deck that are also really strong and that you're going to have to deal with eventually. So if there's a boss battle, you have to deal with that first. But if not, then you're going to go on to the boosting hand, which is simply playing the ability cards from your hand. You can play egg cards, you can play the other evolved cards and boost yourself up. Then you go to hunting. Hunting always happens before you have the chance to buy any of the other cards. Play cards from your hand in order to get hunt value and go after these different creatures and potentially have to take different special effects and abilities that they inflict upon you. And the last thing you do is what's called scavenging and consuming, which is playing the getting evolve points from the cards that you have in your hand, the scavenging cards like the carcasses, or potentially consuming cards that you've hunted previously. In order to get evolve points, you can purchase one card either from the evolution row or from the hatchery, cards that you've already hatched. Remember that you don't start off with cards in your hatchery. You have to hope that you play things like eggs that put cards into your hatchery. And if you can't buy the cards that are put into your hatchery in the turn, they get recycled. And recycled in this game means they get put to the bottom of their respective decks. So if you don't purchase it now, it's going to be a while before you can get that particular card again. And the last thing that you do is simply clean up. This is where you discard cards and then go to your end step, essentially. I mean, it's typical deck building type stuff. And remember, like I said at the beginning of this overview, your goal is to have the most boss cards killed personally at the end of the game, which happens when you've gone through the entire environment deck and gone through the extinction event. If in the case that either there's a tie for a number of boss cards killed or nobody's killed boss cards, you look at the tiny little numbers on the prey cards from, or any of the other cards from the hunting deck. Whoever has the most points is going to be the winner. That's a not so quick and dirty run through of Apex Theropod deck building game. Let's get to my final thoughts. Okay, I have a lot to say about Apex, but I'll try to keep this brief and concise. If I was going to sum up my experience with the game as a whole in just a simple sentence, it would be that Apex has a lot of wonderful and neat thematic deck building elements, but to get to those elements is a tremendous amount of work that is probably not worth it. So let me go ahead and break down what I mean by that. When you're talking about what's wonderful about the game, the theme drips through in almost every part of it. I mean, it really was amazing. And it's hard for that to happen with a deck building game. As much as I love deck builders, most of them just feel like dry, unthematic experiences. You're just kind of going through the motions, trying to gather as many cards as you can and get as many points as you can, which, by the way, I'm fine with in most situations. I just love the mechanisms, but they're not thematic. Apex really bucks that trend. I mean, it's in every part of the game. You have, for starters, your own individual Apex Predator that you're controlling that is completely different from all the other ones. That, first and foremost, is one of the best things about the game. How you go about winning and what your tactics are going to be different. If you're one of the big predators like the T-Rex, or I'm going to butcher all the names, so I'm not even going to try, but the other predators that are similar to T-Rex, then you're getting out these big, powerful, lumbering creatures that might be difficult to play, difficult to evolve from and grab from your hatchery, but are really strong. Whereas if you play creatures like the Raptors, which is one of my favorite decks that I played with, your tactics may be that you have really kind of weaker creatures that you can go into the hunting grounds with, but you can get them out very quickly because Raptors hunt in packs, or so we think. So that's a really great element. I love the idea that you have this hatchery that you're getting new dinosaurs from, and how you do it is by playing the egg cards, which is really cool and neat. You can evolve the dinosaurs by eating the carcasses of creatures that you hunt. I mean, that's amazing. You start off with carcasses, and then you can go and hunt bigger and better prey, and there's big game, and these the titans, the brontosaurus type creatures, and brachiosauruses. I think brontosaurus doesn't technically exist anymore, something like that. But so all these really neat thematic elements, and then talking about the artwork of the game. I'm always kind of leery when they have like sort of stylized, pseudo-realistic artwork. It's like CG style artwork, but it works really well here. It's really high quality, and the fact that they have so much unique artwork for each of the different decks is great. So when you add that together with all these different thematic bits with the game mechanisms, it's really interesting and fascinating how that works. But as I said, to get to that point is a chore, and I don't like it when my games are a chore. First off, if we want to stay on the components for a minute, I really despise the fact that so many of the different decks have the same back, because there are so many different decks out on the table that they're going to be easily confused. Now, in some cases, this was a necessity. Like, for instance, your hatchery cards, those are going to be part of your deck eventually, so those have to go into your deck, and the affliction cards may have to go into your deck as well, and so on. But other cards, like the hunting ground cards, I don't see a reason why those had to have the same backs, and I don't see a reason why you couldn't adjust the mechanics of, say, the affliction cards so that they wouldn't have to go in your deck. Maybe you take an affliction card and it stays in front of you. The reason why this is a problem and why I'm harping on this is because the game has a big footprint of multiple different decks of cards, not just for the general play area, but for you as well. You have your draw deck, you have your apex deck, which then has to make a hatchery that the cards will come out of. You hatch a card, it goes into a separate pile next to it that you have available to purchase. Then you have the cards that you're taking from the hunting grounds that go into another pile. There's so many different things that you have to worry about that really, there's no reason this game shouldn't have had a game board or a playmat. I mean, Marvel Legendary is mostly the same way. It's not, I don't think it's as bad as Apex as far as this problem goes. But if there was no board or playmat in Legendary or Legendary Villains, it would be a disaster. They thought ahead to include that despite the extra expense. And Apex needs to have that. There's too many different cards and decks that are milling about. It's too confusing for players, especially trying to teach the game. And by the way, the rulebook does not help. And this is one thing I've seen that's a common opinion of people. The rulebook is atrocious. Supposedly there's a PDF of a newer, updated rulebook online. I kind of looked it over and it wasn't much better, but the rulebook that comes out of the box is just horrific. And trying to learn the game from that, I've had this game for a while and have not been able to play it and get it to the table because of that rulebook and trying to explain the game with the steep learning curve. So that was just a huge stumbling block to get through this and to get to the cool parts of Apex. And there's a few other middling things I would complain about. I think that the game is really a solitaire game, and you can play it solitaire, it says it right on the box, but really that I feel is what the game is meant for. I've played it with both solo and with other players, and because, first off, about all those different fiddly things I talked about, but also just because there's no interaction between the other players. You're strictly trying to be as best as you possibly can. I mean, even games like the DC Deck Builder have some interaction. There's attack cards, and through the different sets, that's actually become more pronounced, whereas in Apex, you're just doing your own thing. And that's a bit weird. The boss battles feel kind of not that important. I feel like it's another layer of fiddliness that was not necessary. Just have bigger and badder creatures that might come through the deck. And there's things that could have been adjusted that would also help the fiddliness, or maybe exacerbate it a bit. But if you had playmats, it wouldn't be an issue. So for instance, I was thinking, why should there only be one card hatched from the hatchery when you play an egg card? Why even bother with that necessarily? Why not have the eggs just be like a bonus that helps you get those cards from the hatchery, and have like your own personal lineup of cards you can purchase from, like War Machine High Command does it. So you still feel like you have your own deck, it's highly customized, but you have way more options of how you can customize it, and you can do it faster, because some turns you just can't afford the really great cards that come out of your hatchery, but you really want to because your deck is just stagnating with your starting cards, your hatchlings, your juvenile, and your carcasses, and you really want to get better stuff in there, and it's just tough. And when the lineup is full of really strong cards in the hunting grounds that you can't get to because you don't have those stronger cards, it can feel very frustrating and can feel like your entire engine has stalled indefinitely. So there's a lot of little things that this game needs to address. There's some big issues with the fiddliness and just how the game is on the table and how it functions that really need to be addressed. But there are great things here, enough that if this game ever got revamped, had a second edition that addressed a lot of these problems, that condensed it down, the same way that they're kind of doing that with the Study in Emerald, I would absolutely try it. Because as it is now, I can't recommend it in its current incarnation, despite all the things that I love about it, because it's just too much of an aggravation. I would never inflict this on another group of players, but hopefully they come back to the drawing board and do it right a second time. That is Apex Theropod deck building game from Die Hard Games.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.